For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council believed they had humanity figured out. Humans were the polite newcomers, the diplomatic species that always sought peaceful solutions. They were the ones who brought coffee and chocolate to trade negotiations, who apologized when their ships were late, who sent thank you notes after every treaty signing. The Council's xenobiologists had filed their reports: humans, cooperative, non-aggressive, suitable for junior partnership roles. Their military analysts had noted, human fleet composition suggests defensive posture only. Their economists had concluded, human trade practices indicate a species more interested in mutual benefit than dominance. They were right about everything, except one crucial detail. They had mistaken restraint for weakness. For 30 centuries, humanity had played by the galaxy's rules, honored every treaty, respected every border, and swallowed every insult with a diplomatic smile. They had been the perfect galactic citizens, the model species that others pointed to as proof that civilization could work. But patience, even human patience, has limits. And when the Zephyrian Empire made their final, catastrophic mistake, when they decided that humanity's kindness was invitation for exploitation, they discovered something that no species in galactic history had ever survived learning: a human saying please is a request. A human saying we insist is a demand. But when humans stopped talking altogether, that's when you should have started running. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology, their adaptability, or even their famous stubbornness. It had been their choice to be nice. And that choice had just been revoked. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the pristine corridors of the Galactic Council headquarters, her reflection multiplied endlessly in the polished crystalline walls. Her diplomatic uniform bore the subtle wear of 3 decades of service, each crease telling the story of countless negotiations, treaties, and careful words chosen to maintain humanity's fragile position in galactic society. She checked her chronometer one final time before entering Conference Room Alpha 7, where the emergency session would determine humanity's fate. In her briefcase, she carried humanity's response to the Zephyrian Empire's latest ultimatum. The weight of it felt heavier than the actual documents inside. The conference room fell silent as she entered. Representatives from the galaxy's major powers occupied the floating discussion pods arranged in the traditional circle of equals, though Sarah knew the arrangement was anything but equal. The Zephyrians commanded the largest pod, their serpentine forms coiled in positions of obvious dominance. High Admiral Vexthal, their military commander, watched her with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up wounded prey. Counselor Mordak of the Hegemony Coalition spoke first, his forearms gesturing in the ritual patterns of official procedure. Ambassador Chen, the Council has reviewed the Zephyrian Empire's concerns regarding human expansion into the Outer Rim territories. We trust humanity will respond appropriately to maintain galactic stability. Sarah had heard variations of this same speech for 30 years. The script never changed, only the details. Humanity would be asked to step back, to compromise, to understand that their needs came secondary to galactic harmony. And humanity would comply, as they always had. She opened her briefcase with practiced calm, retrieving a single datapad. Honorable counselors, humanity has carefully considered the Zephyrian Empire's position regarding our settlement rights in the Kepler 442 system. High Admiral Vexthal's scales rippled with anticipation. The system belongs to Zephyrian space. Your illegal colonies will be removed, by force if necessary. The threat hung in the chamber like a toxic cloud. Other representatives shifted uncomfortably in their pods, but none spoke in humanity's defense. This too was part of the script. The strong would demand, the weak would submit, and the moderates would express regret while doing nothing. Sarah had participated in this dance of diplomacy for 3 decades. She had watched humanity give ground again and again, always for the greater good, always to maintain peace. They had surrendered the mineral-rich Vega colonies to the hegemony. They had abandoned their research stations in the Sagittarius Arm when the Crystalline Confederacy claimed territorial rights. They had even agreed to harsh trade restrictions that kept human worlds perpetually dependent on galactic markets. Each time, human leaders had made the same calculation: survival trumped pride. Better to bend than break. Better to endure insults than invite annihilation. But this time was different. The Kepler 442 system contained the only known deposits of element X94, a rare isotope essential for the medical treatment of Kessler's syndrome, a genetic disorder that affected nearly 15% of humanity. Without access to those deposits, millions of human children would die before reaching adulthood. The Kepler system was legitimately settled under the provisions of the Galactic Settlement Accords, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. Human colonists have maintained a presence there for 12 years, with full documentation filed through proper channels. Vexthal's laugh was a sound like grinding metal. Accords written when humans were grateful for any scraps the galaxy might throw them. Times change, Ambassador. The Empire has decided that system falls within our expanded security perimeter. Expanded security perimeter? Sarah's diplomatic training warred with her growing anger. High Admiral, the Kepler system is 43 light-years from the nearest Zephyrian outpost. By what definition does that constitute a security concern? By our definition, Vexthal replied with casual arrogance. The Empire recognizes no other authority in this matter. The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence. This was the moment where humanity would typically seek compromise, offer concessions, find some middle ground that preserved peace while surrendering substance. Sarah could see the expectation in every alien face around the circle. Instead, she powered down her datapad and returned it to her briefcase. Ambassador Chen, Counselor Mordak prompted, surely humanity wishes to propose alternative solutions? Perhaps shared mining rights, or tributary arrangements? Sarah stood and fastened her briefcase with deliberate care. When she spoke, her voice carried a tone the Council had never heard from a human diplomat before. It was the sound of a door closing. For 30 years, I have stood in chambers like this one, listening to demands disguised as negotiations. I have watched humanity surrender system after system, compromise principle after principle, all in the name of galactic harmony. She met each alien gaze in turn. I have been proud to serve as humanity's voice in these halls, because I believed that patience and goodwill would eventually earn us the respect we deserved. Vexthal's scales darkened with annoyance. Spare us the human sentimentality, Ambassador. Will you evacuate the colonies or not? Sarah's smile was winter-cold. High Admiral, I am terminating my service as humanity's ambassador to the Galactic Council, effective immediately. I will be returning to Earth to assume a new position in our government. The announcement sent ripples of confusion through the chamber. Mordak leaned forward in his pod. Ambassador, surely this is premature. What position could be more important than maintaining diplomatic relations? Minister of War, Sarah replied quietly. The words hit the chamber like a physical force. In 3,000 years of human participation in galactic affairs, no human government had ever maintained a dedicated military ministry. The human fleet existed purely for system defense and disaster relief. Human military doctrine was based entirely on protection, never aggression. Vexthal recovered first, his serpentine form rising to full height in his pod. Are you threatening the Zephyrian Empire, human? Sarah's diplomatic mask finally slipped, revealing something that made several representatives recoil in their pods. It was the look of someone who had spent 3 decades swallowing poison and had finally decided to stop. High Admiral, for 30 years, humanity has honored every treaty, respected every border, and submitted to every demand made in the name of galactic peace. We have been the model galactic citizens, proof that different species can coexist through mutual respect and understanding. She paused at the chamber's exit, her hand on the door control. But respect, it seems, is a concept the galaxy has forgotten. You mistake our restraint for weakness, our diplomacy for cowardice, our patience for submission. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, yet every word carried to the furthest corners of the chamber. You are about to learn the difference. The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving the council in stunned silence. For several long moments, no one spoke. Finally, Counselor Mordak activated his communication systems. Emergency session, he announced to his aide. Contact all member species. We may have a problem. In the corridor outside, Sarah Chen walked with purpose toward the human diplomatic section. Her 30 years of service were ending, but her real work was just beginning. Behind her, the council chamber erupted into panicked conversation as representatives began to grasp the magnitude of what had just occurred. For the first time in galactic history, humanity had said no. And refused to explain why. The Zephyrian Empire would receive their answer soon enough, but it wouldn't come from diplomats or politicians. It would come from Admiral Sarah Chen, and it would be written in the language that the galaxy understood best. Force. As she reached the human embassy section, Sarah allowed herself one last look back at the council chambers where she had spent the best years of her life pursuing an impossible dream. Peace through strength had failed. Perhaps it was time to try strength through strength. The galaxy had taught humanity many lessons over the centuries. Now it was humanity's turn to teach. And some lessons, Sarah knew, could only be learned the hard way. Admiral Marcus Webb stood in the observation deck of the UES Defiance, watching as the greatest fleet in human history assembled in the asteroid fields beyond Luna. For 3 months since Sarah Chen's dramatic resignation from the Galactic Council, humanity had been busy. Very busy. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Within days of Chen's appointment as Minister of War, mothballed shipyards throughout human space had roared back to life. Engineers who had spent decades designing cargo haulers and passenger liners suddenly found themselves drafting blueprints for vessels of an entirely different purpose. The change in humanity's industrial output had been so dramatic that several galactic intelligence services had initially dismissed their reports as sensor malfunctions. They were no longer dismissing anything. Status report, Commander Hayes, Webb called to his operations officer. Commander Elena Hayes consulted her datapad, her expression mixing professional competence with barely suppressed excitement. Fleet assembly is proceeding ahead of schedule, sir. 7th Fleet reported ready for deployment this morning. That brings us to full operational strength across all commands. Webb nodded, though his attention remained fixed on the massive shapes moving through the void beyond the viewport. The sight still amazed him. For 3 centuries, human military doctrine had focused purely on defense. Their ships were designed to protect colonies and trade routes, not to project power across interstellar distances. The few times humanity had engaged in combat, it had been against pirates or hostile alien species on the very fringes of civilization. But that doctrine had been built on a fundamental assumption that no longer applied, that humanity could earn respect through restraint. What's our intelligence on Zephyrian fleet movements? Webb asked. Hayes activated her holographic display, showing a 3-dimensional map of local space. Red indicators marked Zephyrian positions, while blue dots represented human assets. The pattern was telling. They're maintaining standard deployment patterns, sir. No evidence of increased readiness or defensive preparations. Their intelligence services seem to believe this is all political theater. Webb's smile was grim. After 30 years of human diplomatic capitulation, he could understand the Zephyrian assumption. Every previous crisis had ended the same way, heated rhetoric followed by quiet compromise. The galaxy expected this crisis to follow the same script. They were about to discover their mistake. Sir, Hayes continued, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. Minister Chen requests your presence for the final strategic briefing. The journey to Earth took 6 hours aboard Webb's personal courier. During the trip, he reviewed the intelligence reports that painted a clear picture of galactic expectations. The major powers were treating the current crisis as an internal human political struggle. Some species were already placing bets on when humanity would announce its inevitable withdrawal from the Kepler system. The briefing room in the Ministry of War was a study in contrasts. The building itself was new, constructed in the emergency authorization period following Chen's appointment. But the people gathered around the strategic table represented centuries of human military experience, officers who had spent their careers preparing for a war they had hoped would never come. Minister Chen stood at the head of the table, her transformation from diplomat to war leader complete. The diplomatic courtesy that had defined her career had been replaced by something harder, more focused. She looked like someone who had finally stopped pretending to be something she wasn't. Gentlemen, ladies, she began without preamble, tomorrow marks the expiration of the Zephyrian ultimatum. In 18 hours, High Admiral Vexthal expects to receive humanity's unconditional surrender of the Kepler system. General Patricia Morrison, the graying head of Human Ground Forces, leaned forward. And our response? Chen's smile was sharp as a blade. We're going to give him exactly what he expects. A human response to his ultimatum. She activated the strategic display, showing the disposition of forces across a 30 light-year radius. The Zephyrian Empire commanded impressive military strength, their fleets distributed across 17 systems in a defensive network that had discouraged aggression for over 2 centuries. The Zephyrians have 47 capital ships in their primary fleet, Chen continued, with supporting elements bringing their total force strength to over 300 vessels. Their ground forces number in the hundreds of millions, supported by advanced weaponry and orbital bombardment capabilities. Admiral Webb studied the display with professional interest. Impressive numbers. And our force projection? Smaller, Chen admitted. But that's not the full picture. She modified the display, highlighting human positions throughout the galaxy. What the projection revealed surprised even Webb. Human assets weren't concentrated in defensive positions around human space. Instead, they were dispersed throughout the galaxy in patterns that seemed almost random until you understood their purpose. For 30 years, Chen explained, humanity has been the galaxy's preferred logistics provider. Human cargo ships service trade routes throughout civilized space. Human technicians maintain communications networks on dozens of non-aligned worlds. Human medical teams staff emergency response centers from the outer rim to the galactic core. The implications hit Webb like a physical blow. We're not just in the galaxy. We're integrated into it. Precisely. The Zephyrians see our fleet strength and assume they understand our capabilities. They don't realize that every human civilian ship can be retrofitted for military purposes within hours. They don't know that every human technical team can become a sabotage unit. They don't understand that 3 centuries of being helpful has given us access to infrastructure they've never imagined we could threaten. General Morrison whistled softly. How many assets are we talking about? Conservative estimate? 50,000 vessels capable of military conversion. 2 million civilian personnel in positions where they could cause significant strategic damage. Complete intelligence on the internal systems of every major galactic power. Chen paused for effect. And absolute control of the galactic communications network. The room fell silent as the officers absorbed the magnitude of what Chen was describing. Webb found his voice first. Minister, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? The Zephyrian Empire wants to discover what happens when humanity stops being diplomatic. Chen's expression was ice-cold. They're about to find out that diplomacy wasn't our weakness. It was our mercy. She changed the display again, this time showing detailed operational plans that took Webb's breath away. The scope was staggering, the complexity breathtaking. This wasn't just a military response to Zephyrian aggression. This was a complete restructuring of galactic power balance, executed with the precision that only 3 centuries of patient observation could provide. Phase 1 begins with the Zephyrian ultimatum deadline, Chen continued. We will respond to their demand for our surrender by demonstrating exactly what human surrender looks like. Webb studied the tactical projections, his admiration growing with each detail. Minister, this is brilliant. But, are we certain about the intelligence data? If we're wrong about their defensive capabilities. Admiral, I spent 30 years in diplomatic service. I know exactly how strong every galactic power believes itself to be. Chen's smile was winter cold. I also know exactly how wrong they are. The briefing continued for 6 hours, covering every aspect of the operation from initial strikes to long-term occupation protocols. When it finally ended, Webb felt as though he had witnessed the birth of a new era in galactic politics. As the other officers filed out, Chen gestured for Webb to remain behind. Marcus, I need to ask something of you that goes beyond your duties as a fleet commander. Webb settled back into his chair. What do you need, Sarah? I need you to understand that after tomorrow, there's no going back. Once we cross this line, humanity will never again be the galaxy's harmless neighbor. We'll be the species that turned 3 centuries of patient observation into the most devastating military campaign in galactic history. Webb considered her words carefully. And, you're certain this is the right choice? Chen walked to the window overlooking the bustling activity of Earth's military district. For 30 years, I believed that patience and good faith would earn humanity the respect we deserved. I was wrong. The galaxy doesn't respect weakness, and it never will. She turned back to face him, and Webb saw something in her expression that spoke to the depth of her conviction. Tomorrow, we teach the galaxy a new lesson. That humanity's greatest strength was never our technology or our adaptability or our stubbornness. It was our choice to be reasonable. And, now we're choosing to be unreasonable. And, the galaxy is about to learn exactly how unreasonable humans can be when they stop trying to be nice. Webb stood and saluted, the gesture carrying weight beyond mere protocol. I understand, Minister. The fleet will be ready. As he left the Ministry of War, Webb looked up at the stars visible through Earth's protective atmospheric dome. Somewhere out there, High Admiral Vexthal was preparing to receive humanity's response to his ultimatum. The Zephyrian commander expected surrender, submission, or perhaps desperate negotiation. Instead, he was going to receive something no galactic power had ever experienced in 3,000 years of interstellar civilization. He was going to receive a demonstration of what humans could do when they stopped holding back. And, Webb suspected that after tomorrow, the galaxy would never be the same. High Admiral Vexthal coiled in his command throne aboard the dreadnought Infinite Dominion, watching the chronometer count down the final minutes of humanity's grace period. Around him, the bridge crew of his flagship maintained the casual efficiency of a military force that had never faced a serious challenge. The Zephyrian Empire's fleet hung in space beyond the edge of the Kepler system, a demonstration of overwhelming force that had convinced dozens of species to reconsider their territorial ambitions. Today would be no different. Humans were traders and diplomats, not warriors. Their pathetic fleet consisted mainly of converted cargo vessels and patrol craft designed for police actions against pirates. The idea that such a force could challenge the might of the Zephyrian Empire was so absurd it bordered on comedy. Admiral, Communications Officer Esikatar announced, we're receiving a transmission from the human colony on Kepler 442 Prime. Standard diplomatic frequency. Vexthal's scales rippled with satisfaction. Right on schedule. The humans would announce their withdrawal from the system, probably with some face-saving language about temporary relocation pending further negotiations. Then, this farce would be over, and the Empire could get back to more important matters. Put it through, he commanded. The main display activated, showing not the expected human colonial administrator, but Admiral Marcus Webb standing on the bridge of a vessel Vexthal didn't recognize. The human wore a crisp military uniform and carried himself with the bearing of a professional soldier, which struck the Zephyrian as mildly interesting but ultimately irrelevant. High Admiral Vexthal, Webb began with formal courtesy, I am Admiral Marcus Webb of the Human Defense Force. I have been authorized to respond to your ultimatum regarding the Kepler system. Vexthal settled more comfortably in his command throne. Admiral Webb. I trust you bring word of human withdrawal from our territory. Webb's expression never changed. Actually, Admiral, I'm here to discuss the terms of your surrender. The bridge of the Infinite Dominion fell into stunned silence. Several junior officers exchanged confused glances, uncertain they had heard correctly. Vexthal himself blinked his massive eyes slowly, processing the unprecedented audacity of the human statement. I beg your pardon, he finally managed. Your surrender, Webb repeated patiently. You have 30 minutes to order all Zephyrian military forces to stand down and prepare for boarding by human inspection teams. Failure to comply will result in the immediate implementation of Protocol 7. Vexthal's confusion transformed into rage. His scales darkened to deep crimson as he rose to his full height. Human, you are facing the combined might of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet. My forces outnumber your pathetic ships 50-1. Are you suffering from some form of mental breakdown? Webb checked his chronometer with the same casual efficiency a diplomat might use to note the time for a meeting. 29 minutes, 30 seconds. Tactical display, Vexthal barked to his operations officer. Show this deluded human exactly what he's facing. The bridge's main screen split to show the tactical situation. The Zephyrian fleet spread across local space in a formation that had intimidated enemies for 2 centuries, 47 capital ships arranged in attack formation, with over 200 supporting vessels creating an impenetrable wall of firepower. Opposing them was a human force that appeared to consist of perhaps 30 ships, most of them clearly converted civilian vessels. The disparity was so enormous it was almost embarrassing. Webb studied the display with professional interest. Impressive formation, Admiral. Very traditional. I can see why it served you well against conventional opponents. Conventional? Vexthal's laugh was like grinding metal. Human, there is nothing unconventional about military reality. You are outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed. Now, will you surrender your illegal colonies, or do I need to demonstrate why the Empire has never lost a military engagement? Actually, Webb replied, you've already lost this engagement. You just don't know it yet. Before Vexthal could respond, alarms began sounding throughout his ship. Status lights flashed red across multiple control stations as his crew scrambled to identify the source of the alerts. Admiral. Chief Engineer Corvell's voice crackled through the communications system, panic evident even through the universal translator. We're experiencing cascade failures in the primary power grid. All of them, sir. Every ship in the fleet is reporting the same problem. Vexthal felt a cold sensation in his primary stomach that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Explain. Sir, it appears that someone has introduced malicious code into our central computer networks. The code is rewriting itself faster than our security systems can contain it. We're losing secondary systems across the entire fleet. The tactical display flickered and changed, showing new information that made Vexthal's scales turn pale yellow with shock. Dozens of new contacts had appeared throughout Zephyrian space, human vessels that hadn't been there moments before. But that was impossible. No fleet could move that fast, and their sensors would have detected any large-scale military mobilization. Admiral, Webb's voice cut through the chaos on the Zephyrian bridge. Perhaps now would be a good time to explain what you're actually facing. The display changed again, this time showing a 3-dimensional map of Zephyrian space that included details no foreign power should have possessed. Human forces were highlighted throughout the Empire, not as an invading fleet, but as assets that had been in position for years. For 30 years, Webb continued in the same conversational tone, humanity has serviced the maintenance contracts for your communications networks, your traffic control systems, your automated defense platforms, and your orbital manufacturing facilities. We've been very helpful that way. Vexthal watched in horror as the tactical display showed human control spreading through his empire's infrastructure like a virus. Communication relays went offline in cascading failures. Automated defense systems began targeting each other. Manufacturing centers shut down as their control systems were locked out by authorization codes that no longer recognized Zephyrian access credentials. Impossible, he whispered. 23 minutes, Webb noted. I should mention that the fleet you're currently facing represents approximately 5% of human military capabilities. The other 95% is currently positioned throughout galactic space, waiting for my signal. The Zephyrian Admiral's tactical training warred with the unprecedented nature of the situation. Everything he understood about warfare suggested that Webb was bluffing, that no species could project force across such distances without years of preparation and massive military buildups that intelligence services would have detected. But the evidence on his screens told a different story. Human forces weren't just attacking Zephyrian military targets. They were everywhere. Trade stations throughout the Empire reported human personnel declaring themselves under new management. Civilian communication networks carried messages in human languages announcing new administrative procedures. Even the traffic control systems in the capital system were responding to human command codes. Admiral, Communications Officer Esikatar called out, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, I'm receiving surrender requests from everywhere, sir. Fleet bases, planetary governors, sector commanders. They're all asking for instructions on how to surrender to human forces. Vexthal's world tilted on its axis. The Zephyrian Empire commanded dozens of systems and hundreds of billions of citizens. The idea that human forces could simultaneously threaten assets across such a vast territory was beyond his comprehension. How? He asked Webb, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 centuries of being helpful, Webb replied. 3 centuries of maintaining your computers, servicing your ships, operating your cargo networks, and staffing your emergency services. 3 centuries of you never bothering to ask what we were learning while we were being so very, very helpful. The truth hit Vexthal like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't been building a fleet for conquest. They had been building a web of dependency that spanned the entire galaxy, placing human personnel and human technology in positions where they could cripple galactic civilization at will. The other galactic powers, Vexthal managed. They'll never allow this. Webb's smile was sharp as a blade. Admiral, right now, every major galactic power is dealing with the same situation you are. Humans aren't just integrated into Zephyrian infrastructure. We're integrated into everything. As if to emphasize his point, the display showed alerts from across local space. The Hegemony Coalition was reporting massive system failures. The Crystalline Confederacy had lost contact with half their fleet. Even the minor powers were broadcasting emergency requests for assistance with infrastructure failures that their own technicians couldn't repair. 18 minutes, Webb noted. I should mention that your current situation is entirely reversible. Human technical teams are standing by to restore all affected systems the moment you announce your surrender. We're not here to destroy the Zephyrian Empire, Admiral. We're here to teach it some manners. Vexthal's strategic mind raced through the options available to him. He could order his fleet to attack the human ships in front of him, but that would accomplish nothing if humans controlled his empire's infrastructure. He could attempt to contact the Imperial Council, but his communications were operating at human discretion. He could try to rally other galactic powers to resist, but they were apparently facing the same impossible situation. Or he could accept the unprecedented reality that the galaxy's most peaceful species had just demonstrated the most sophisticated military operation in recorded history. What are your terms? He asked, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of imperial pride crumbling into dust. Unconditional withdrawal from the Kepler system, Webb replied promptly. Formal recognition of human territorial rights throughout the Outer Rim. Reparations for 30 years of diplomatic harassment. And a public apology to be broadcast on all Imperial communication channels. The terms were humiliating but not impossible. Vexthal could accept them and maintain some semblance of Imperial dignity, or he could refuse and watch his empire tear itself apart as humans systematically dismantled the infrastructure that held it together. 15 minutes, Webb added helpfully. Vexthal looked around his bridge at officers who had served the Empire with distinction for decades, now watching their admiral prepare to surrender to a force they couldn't fight, couldn't understand, and couldn't escape. The Zephyrian Empire accepts your terms, he announced, each word feeling like poison in his throat. Webb nodded as though accepting the surrender of the galaxy's second most powerful military force was simply another item on his daily schedule. Excellent. Stand by to receive detailed instructions for the transition process. And, Admiral? Yes? Welcome to the new galactic order. I think you're going to find it very educational. The transmission ended, leaving Vexthal alone with the ruins of everything he had believed about power, politics, and the nature of warfare itself. Outside his viewports, human ships moved with quiet efficiency to begin the occupation of his fleet. And, throughout the galaxy, other species were learning the same lesson that Vexthal had just learned the hard way. Humanity had been polite for 3 centuries. Now they were done being polite. 3 weeks after what galactic historians would later call the 48-hour revolution, the emergency session of the Galactic Council convened under circumstances that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. The massive assembly chamber that had once symbolized the collaborative spirit of interstellar civilization now felt more like a courtroom, with humanity sitting in judgment of the galaxy's former powers. Councillor Mordak of the Hegemony Coalition took his traditional position as session moderator, though his forearms trembled with a nervousness that was entirely new to his species' diplomatic experience. Around the chamber, representatives from dozens of worlds sat in stunned silence, still processing the magnitude of how completely their understanding of galactic politics had been overturned. Minister Sarah Chen occupied the human delegation's pod with the calm confidence of someone who had spent 3 weeks watching her most ambitious plans exceed even her own expectations. Behind her sat Admiral Webb and a small team of human military advisors, their presence serving as a quiet reminder of the force that now backed human diplomatic positions. This emergency session, Mordak began, his voice carefully controlled, has been called to address the recent changes in galactic political structure and to establish new frameworks for interspecies cooperation. The diplomatic language was careful, formal, and completely inadequate to describe what had actually happened. In 48 hours, humanity had demonstrated the ability to simultaneously cripple every major galactic power without firing a single shot. The revelation that 3 centuries of helpful human integration into galactic infrastructure had been, in effect, the most patient military deployment in recorded history, had shattered every assumption about interstellar politics. High Admiral Vexthal spoke first, his scales a dull gray that indicated deep humiliation. The Zephyrian Empire wishes to formally acknowledge the new political reality and express our gratitude for humanity's restraint in resolving our territorial dispute. The words obviously caused him physical pain, but Chen noted his delivery with professional approval. Vexthal was adapting to circumstances with admirable speed, considering that his entire worldview had been demolished 3 weeks ago. Representative Kektal of the Crystalline Confederacy was less gracious. Minister Chen, while the Confederacy acknowledges humanity's impressive technical capabilities, we must express concern about the precedent this sets for interspecies relations. The use of infrastructure sabotage as a military tactic threatens the fundamental trust that underlies galactic civilization. Chen's response was delivered with the same diplomatic courtesy that had characterized her career as an ambassador, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. Representative Kektal, I appreciate your concern about trust. Perhaps we should discuss the Confederacy's trustworthiness in honoring territorial agreements, given your species' history of claiming sovereignty over human research stations. The pointed reference to the Sagittarius incident 15 years earlier hit the chamber like a physical blow. Kektal's crystalline structure flickered with embarrassment as Chen continued. Or perhaps we should examine the hegemony's reliability in trade negotiations, considering their practice of imposing retroactive tariffs on human goods. Her gaze shifted to Mordak, whose forearms were now visibly shaking. Or the dozens of minor powers who have spent 3 decades treating human diplomatic protests as suggestions rather than legitimate grievances. The silence in the chamber was deafening. For the first time in galactic history, human complaints were being taken seriously, not because of moral authority or legal precedent, but because ignoring them was no longer safe. Ambassador Felnath of the Outer Rim Coalition finally found the courage to speak. Minister, what does humanity want from us? Your actions have demonstrated that you could dictate terms to the entire galaxy. Are we to understand that human policy is now based on coercion rather than cooperation? Chen stood from her delegation chair, a gesture that drew every eye in the chamber. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of accumulated grievances. Ambassador Felnath, for 300 years, humanity has sought cooperation based on mutual respect and shared benefits. We have honored every treaty, respected every border, and contributed more to galactic prosperity than any other species in recorded history. Our response to aggression has been diplomatic protest. Our reaction to territorial seizure has been legal arbitration. Our answer to trade discrimination has been patient negotiation. She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. The result has been 3 centuries of systematic exploitation. Every galactic power in this chamber has, at some point, decided that human interests could be sacrificed for their convenience. You have mistaken our restraint for weakness and our diplomacy for submission. The truth of her words was undeniable. Every representative in the chamber could recall instances where their governments had prioritized their own interests over human rights, secure in the knowledge that humans would accept injustice rather than risk conflict. So to answer your question directly, Chen continued, humanity's new policy is very simple. We will continue to honor agreements with species that honor agreements with us. We will maintain peaceful relations with governments that treat us as equals rather than subordinates. We will trade freely with powers that offer fair terms rather than exploitative contracts. Admiral Webb stood and moved to the chamber's central display, activating a holographic projection that showed the current state of galactic infrastructure. Every representative could see the scope of human integration into their civilization's basic systems. But, Chen added with quiet finality, we will no longer pretend that patience and goodwill can substitute for respect. The galaxy has spent 3 centuries teaching us that power is the only language you understand. Consider the lesson learned. Representative Volmac of the Traders Guild, whose species had profited enormously from advantageous contracts with human worlds, cleared her throat nervously. Minister Chen, surely we can work together to establish new frameworks that address humanity's legitimate concerns while maintaining the stability of existing galactic institutions. Chen's smile was genuinely warm, which somehow made it more terrifying than her earlier anger. Representative Volmac, I'm delighted to hear your species is interested in addressing humanity's legitimate concerns. Perhaps we can begin by renegotiating the Guild's exclusive shipping contracts with human worlds, which currently provide your species with profit margins of nearly 400%. Volmac's fur changed to the pale blue of shock. The specific details of Guild profit structures were supposed to be confidential commercial information. The fact that humans knew them suggested a level of intelligence gathering that extended far beyond infrastructure control. How, she whispered. 3 centuries of being helpful, Admiral Webb replied from the display controls. You might be surprised how much confidential information people share with technicians who are just trying to fix their computers. The revelation sent ripples of alarm throughout the chamber. If humans had access to detailed commercial data, what else did they know? Military capabilities? Political structures? Personal communications? Counselor Mordak struggled to regain control of the session. Minister Chen, what assurances can humanity provide that this information will not be misused? The same assurances the galaxy has provided humanity for 3 centuries, Chen replied. Our word, backed by our actions. We have never betrayed a confidence, broken a treaty, or violated a sovereign border. Our record speaks for itself. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Human behavior throughout their galactic history had been characterized by reliability and honor, while every other major power could point to instances of broken promises and territorial aggression. What we're proposing, Chen continued, is a new galactic order based on genuine reciprocity. Species that treat humanity as an equal partner will find us the most reliable allies in galactic history. Species that attempt to return to the old patterns of exploitation will discover that we have very long memories and very comprehensive records. High Admiral Vexthal found his voice again, though it carried a note of desperation. And, if we refuse? If the galactic powers unite to resist human hegemony? Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made several representatives instinctively recoil in their pods. Admiral, you're free to try. But, I should point out that human technical teams are currently maintaining the life support systems on 60% of the habitable worlds in known space. We're operating the traffic control systems that prevent commercial shipping from colliding in hyperspace lanes. We're running the communication networks that allow your governments to contact their military forces. The implications hung in the chamber like a toxic cloud. Humanity wasn't just militarily superior. They had become so integrated into galactic civilization that removing them would cause a systemic collapse that would set interstellar development back centuries. Of course, Chen added cheerfully, we have no intention of disrupting these services as long as our partners continue to treat us with appropriate respect. We're not conquerors, ladies and gentlemen. We're simply no longer willing to be victims. Representative Kektal's crystalline structure had dimmed to barely perceptible levels. What happens now? Now, Chen replied, settling back into her delegation chair, we negotiate new agreements based on equality rather than exploitation. We establish trade relationships that benefit all parties rather than just the powerful ones. We create a galactic order where disputes are resolved through honest negotiation rather than veiled threats. She looked around the chamber at faces that still showed shock, fear, and confusion. In other words, we're going to try the cooperation approach one more time. But, this time, everyone is going to cooperate. The session continued for 6 more hours, establishing the framework for what would become known as the Terran Accords. When it finally ended, every galactic power had agreed to renegotiate their relationships with humanity on terms that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. As representatives filed out of the chamber, many looked back at the human delegation with expressions mixing fear and grudging respect. They had come expecting to contain a human tantrum and had instead discovered that they were dealing with a species that had spent 3 centuries preparing for this exact moment. Shen remained in her chair until the chamber was empty except for her team. When Admiral Webb approached, she was staring at the empty pods where galactic leaders had sat for the first honest negotiation in interstellar history. "How do you think we did?" Webb asked. Shen smiled, and, for the first time in weeks, it reached her eyes. "I think we just taught the galaxy that there's a difference between being nice and being weak. And, now we find out if they're capable of learning." Outside the chamber, the galaxy began the complex process of adjusting to a new reality where humanity's interests could no longer be ignored. It would be a difficult transition, but Shen suspected that once the initial shock wore off, most species would discover that dealing with humans as equals was far more profitable than dealing with them as victims. After all, humans had always been very good at being helpful. Now they were just being helpful on their own terms. 1 year after the Terran Accords, Ambassador Dr. Elena Vasquez walked through the corridors of the newly constructed Galactic Cooperation Center on Kepler Station, observing the remarkable transformation that had taken place in interstellar relations. The station itself, built in the system that had sparked the crisis leading to humanity's dramatic revelation, now served as the headquarters for a galactic community that bore little resemblance to the old order. The architectural design reflected the change in priorities. Gone were the imposing chambers designed to intimidate and overwhelm. Instead, the station featured collaborative workspaces, research facilities, and meeting areas built to facilitate genuine cooperation rather than political theater. The symbolism was intentional and powerful. Dr. Vasquez paused at the observation deck overlooking the station's central plaza, where representatives from dozens of species worked together on projects that would have been impossible under the previous system. Human engineers collaborated with Crystalline Confederacy scientists on new medical technologies. Zephyrian military officers trained alongside human peacekeeping forces in joint exercises designed to address piracy in the Outer Rim. Even the Hegemony Coalition had contributed significant resources to the station's construction, though their motives were more pragmatic than altruistic. "Impressive, isn't it?" came a familiar voice behind her. Dr. Vasquez turned to see Admiral Webb approaching, his uniform bearing the new insignia of the Galactic Defense Force, a joint military organization that had emerged from the chaos of the previous year. His appointment as its first human commander had been controversial among some species, but his competence was undeniable. "Very impressive," she agreed. "Though I have to admit, sometimes I still can't believe it actually worked." Webb joined her at the observation windows, looking down at the bustling activity below. Sarah's plan was brilliant, but it required perfect timing and flawless execution. If we had moved too early, the galaxy would have united against us before we were ready. Too late, and they might have discovered our capabilities before we could demonstrate them. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement echoing through the station's communication system. "Attention all personnel. The inaugural session of the Galactic Research Consortium will begin in Conference Chamber Alpha in 15 minutes. All project coordinators please report for final briefings." Dr. Vasquez checked her chronometer and gathered her materials. As the newly appointed Director of Interspecies Cooperation, she would be presenting the consortium's first major initiative to representatives from every galactic power. The project represented something unprecedented in the history of interstellar relations, a genuine collaborative effort based on mutual benefit rather than political manipulation. The conference chamber was filled with beings that represented the full diversity of galactic civilization. Dr. Vasquez took her position at the central podium, noting the dramatic difference in atmosphere compared to the old Galactic Council meetings. There was no sense of tension or barely suppressed hostility. Instead, the room buzzed with the energy of professionals excited about the possibility of meaningful work. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored representatives," Dr. Vasquez began, 1 year ago, humanity announced its intention to seek genuine partnership rather than continued subordination in galactic affairs. Today, we have the opportunity to demonstrate what such partnership can accomplish. She activated the chamber's holographic display, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with highlighted regions indicating areas of particular interest. The Galactic Research Consortium's first major project will address a challenge that affects every species in this chamber: the energy crisis threatening our continued expansion into unexplored regions of space. The problem was real and urgent. Traditional power generation methods were reaching their practical limits as galactic civilization expanded beyond the resource-rich core systems. Several promising colony worlds had been abandoned when their energy requirements exceeded available technology, and long-range exploration was becoming increasingly difficult as ships pushed beyond the range of established supply networks. Working together, Dr. Vasquez continued, we have identified a potential solution that combines the unique capabilities of multiple species. The Crystalline Confederacy's expertise in energy storage, the Zephyrian Empire's advanced propulsion technology, the Hegemony Coalition's manufacturing capabilities, and humanity's systems integration experience. Representative Kektal, whose attitude toward humans had improved dramatically since the revelation of humanity's true capabilities, leaned forward with obvious interest. Dr. Vasquez, are you proposing what I think you're proposing? A completely new approach to power generation based on quantum resonance principles, yes. Our preliminary calculations suggest we could achieve energy output levels nearly 300% higher than current technology, with substantially reduced resource requirements. The excitement in the chamber was palpable. Such an advancement would revolutionize galactic civilization, opening up possibilities for expansion and development that had been impossible under existing limitations. High Admiral Vexthal, who had adapted to the new galactic order with surprising grace, spoke up from his delegation's position. The Empire would be honored to contribute our propulsion research to such an initiative. Though I confess, Admiral, a year ago I would not have believed such cooperation was possible. Admiral Webb smiled at the Zephyrian's honesty. A year ago, High Admiral, neither would I. But, it turns out that when species actually work together instead of competing for dominance, remarkable things become possible. The observation sparked something that would have been unthinkable in the old Galactic Council sessions, genuine laughter. The sound reflected a fundamental shift in how the galaxy's powers related to each other. Fear and suspicion had been replaced by mutual respect and shared purpose. Dr. Vasquez spent the next 2 hours presenting detailed technical specifications and implementation timelines. The project would require unprecedented coordination between species that had spent centuries viewing each other as competitors or threats. Yet as the discussion progressed, it became clear that every delegation was genuinely committed to making it work. When the session finally concluded, Dr. Vasquez found herself surrounded by representatives eager to discuss specific aspects of the project. The enthusiasm was infectious and encouraging. After centuries of political maneuvering and territorial disputes, the galaxy's brightest minds were finally free to focus on solving actual problems rather than scoring diplomatic points. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Dr. Vasquez noticed Minister Sarah Chen approaching from the chamber's exit. The woman who had orchestrated humanity's dramatic emergence as a galactic power looked remarkably relaxed, though her eyes still carried the sharp intelligence that had made her such a formidable negotiator. "How did it go?" Chen asked. "Better than I dared hope. Every major power has committed significant resources to the project, and several minor species have requested participation roles. We should be able to begin preliminary testing within 6 months." Chen nodded with satisfaction. "And the political climate?" Dr. Vasquez gestured toward the chamber, where representatives from different species continued to discuss technical details in small groups. "See for yourself. They're actually working together, Sarah. Not pretending to cooperate while pursuing hidden agendas, but genuinely collaborating on shared challenges." The transformation was remarkable to witness. A year earlier, such informal interaction between galactic powers would have been impossible. Every conversation would have been carefully managed by diplomatic protocol, every exchange monitored for potential advantages or weaknesses. Now, beings from across the galaxy were sharing ideas and expertise with the casual efficiency of colleagues rather than the careful calculation of rivals. "There is one concern," Dr. Vasquez added quietly. "Some of the newer council members are worried about humanity's long-term intentions. They understand that we could resume our demonstration at any time, and they're not sure how to interpret our restraint." Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "And what do you tell them?" "The truth. That humanity never wanted to dominate the galaxy. We just wanted to be treated as equals rather than junior partners. Now that we've achieved that goal, we have no interest in maintaining the kind of authoritarian control that characterized the old system. And, do they believe you? Dr. Vasquez smiled. They're starting to. Our actions over the past year have been consistently focused on building cooperative institutions rather than extracting advantages. That's helping to establish credibility for our long-term intentions. Chen walked to the chamber's main viewports, looking out at the busy traffic of ships from dozens of species moving through Kepler station's approach corridors. The sight represented everything she had hoped to achieve when she had resigned her position as humanity's ambassador to the old Galactic Council. You know, she said reflectively, I spent 30 years believing that patient diplomacy would eventually earn us the respect we deserved. I was wrong about the timeline, but I wasn't wrong about the goal. We just had to take a more direct approach to achieving it. Dr. Vasquez joined her at the viewport, watching as a massive hegemony transport docked alongside a human research vessel, both ships working together to unload equipment for the consortium's new laboratories. Do you ever regret how it happened? The shock, the fear, the way we had to essentially threaten the entire galaxy to get their attention? Chen was quiet for a long moment before answering. I regret that it was necessary. But, I don't regret that it worked. Look around you, Elena. For the first time in galactic history, major powers are collaborating on projects that benefit everyone rather than competing for relative advantage. We're making genuine progress on problems that have plagued interstellar civilization for centuries. She paused, her expression growing more serious. Besides, the alternative would have been watching humanity slowly lose ground for another few centuries until we became completely irrelevant to galactic affairs. At least this way, we ensured that our children will grow up in a galaxy where being human means something more than being convenient. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement calling Dr. Vasquez to a technical briefing for the consortium's next project. As she gathered her materials to leave, Chen caught her arm gently. Elena, there's something I want you to remember as you work with our new partners. The galaxy spent 3 centuries teaching humanity that power was the only language they understood. We proved we had learned that lesson very well. But, now we have the opportunity to teach them a new lesson. Which is? Chen smiled, and, for the first time since her dramatic confrontation with the old Galactic Council, the expression carried genuine warmth rather than political calculation. That cooperation is more powerful than dominance, that partnership is more productive than exploitation, and that treating others with respect yields better results than treating them with contempt. Dr. Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. And, if they don't learn that lesson? Then, they'll discover that humans are very good students, and we remember everything we're taught. As Dr. Vasquez left for her briefing, Chen remained at the viewport, watching the steady flow of traffic around the station. Ships from every corner of the galaxy moved in carefully coordinated patterns, their crews working together with an efficiency that would have been impossible under the old system of competitive territoriality. The transformation had exceeded even her most optimistic projections. Humanity had not just gained respect within the galactic community, they had fundamentally changed how that community functioned. The galaxy was learning to cooperate instead of merely coexist, and the results were already visible in advances that benefited every species. But, perhaps most importantly, humanity had finally achieved the goal that had motivated 3 centuries of patient diplomatic engagement. They were no longer the galaxy's harmless neighbors, tolerated as long as they remained convenient and disposable when they became troublesome. They were the galaxy's essential partners, respected for their capabilities and valued for their contributions. And that, Chen reflected, had made everything worthwhile. The galaxy had spent 3,000 years believing that might made right, that the strong could dictate terms to the weak, that cooperation was a luxury available only to those with nothing to lose. Humanity had taught them a better way. Now it was up to the galaxy to prove they had learned the lesson.